So, most welcome to Heidegger 1709. And we now continue a bit with complexity of the inner. There's some interesting things popping up at page 54. As a look into what does, or the implication of I believe. And traditionally, so have it been the case that we know our beliefs just by entering into the innerness of our soul. Introspection. Use introspection seem to be the way, and then you will see what are your beliefs. Wittgenstein thinks this is mostly misleading. And there is no possibility of discovering them by some sort of introspective method. And suppose I believed, and this is from page 154, suppose I believed it was raining and it wasn't. It makes no sense to say, I did believe it and then I didn't. I believe it's raining and it isn't. That's the correct phrase. Makes little, if any, sense. And would that mean that a third person where this could hold truth, his sentence means differently than it does in the first person? And as I say, the general issue at the heart of the problem here is the question of whether the individual can observe her own dispositions. A belief, a wish, a fear, a hope, a fondness, each can be called a state of man. We can count on this state in our behavior towards this man, and we can infer his reactions from this state. And if someone says, all this time I had the belief, all my life I wished, etc. He is simply reporting a state, an attitude. But if he says, I believe he is coming, or simply, here he comes, or I wish you'd come, or please come, then he's acting according to that condition, not reporting that he is in it. But if that were right, then there ought to be a present form of that report, and hence, on the other hand, the utterance, I believe, and on the other hand, the report, I am in the state of belief. And similarly for wish, intention, fear, etc. However, the attempt to construe I believe as the report, I am in a state of belief, runs straight into what Wittgenstein called Moore's paradox. If the individual reports her belief, why should she not report that she believes it is raining and that it isn't? After all, people often hold mistaken beliefs. So the report might be correct, and yet for some reason the individual herself can never make it. The key to clarifying this paradox is to note that the individual's description of her own state of mind is also indirectly the description of a state of affairs, there you have it. In other words, someone who says she believes P is thereby committed to asserting P itself. Describing one's state of belief might be likened to describing a photograph in order to describe what the photograph depicts. Makes sense? So the similarity is because of that. The problem of Moore's paradox is that I should further be able to say that this photograph, the impression on her mind, is trustworthy. So I should be able to say, I believe that it's raining, and my belief is trustworthy, so I trust it. And here stems the problem in a nutshell. So although a person can sort of mistrust her own impressions or perceptions, she cannot distrust her own belief. It simply doesn't hold water. Nothing more and nothing less than a nonsensical saying. Seriously doubt it will ever make some sort of sense. And I think this opens up the Pandora's box of a whole bunch of problems associated with the old view of the inner. What do I mean? Well, the inner as something you can introspect into, to see your opinions, your beliefs, gives two different odd results. The first one, obviously, that you can look into them and know them for sure. There's also a sort of secondary aspect. And that is that you will somehow be able to change your beliefs. Have a control of them. And this, of course, plays nicely into this idea of the subject and or subject psychology being absolutely open in some ways. You can just look in and pick things out, and it's also moldable. We somehow, we are an expandable part of reality. And what's inside of us is far from interesting. We are only visitors to this planet, and our psyches are moldable like a piece of clay. We can turn it to whatever we desire somehow. And that, of course, fits nicely with the Newtonian take, where you have this I floating around in the grid of the perpendicular orthogonal directions. Of x, y, z. Non-localized, nowhere, and at the same time everywhere. Flying about, having no content. I think that epitomizes classical physics nicely. Somehow that is exactly what it is about. Moldable, and sometimes also you get the feeling it's a sponge sucking up impressions in a time that passes moment by moment. And when there is some sort of cause and effect connection that almost like a chain binds the movement to each other. Leaving little of freedom. And you as the sponge, or why not the Brunelleschi camera obscura, taking in different small angles of reality, not having access to the greater global take where reality actually is. Reminds me of the development quite recently. We are presently in a happening paradigm. Finally, because of the 3 Nobel Prize laureates, Alain Aspect, Clausinger and Zeilinger, as of 10th of December last year in the Blue Hall in the City House of Stockholm, received the finally, after decades of waiting, acclamation that now a new physics is coming about. And that also questions the idea of the sponge-like figure, square SpongeBob, something maybe, or the camera oscura. The normal take is that we humans only have access to what is called local areas, observable, within reach, and these local areas constitute reality, and it can be used to explain, predict, be in reality. This was questioned by the 3 Nobel Prize laureates. And tragically, if you like, the professors that helped with the explanation why they got the Nobel Prize wrote in the commentary that Mr. Clausinger, Aspect and Zeilinger renounces reality as such. Which is a incredibly odd comment but in lieu of how we only see local reality as reality. It makes intuitive sense. This is how we use reality in everyday language. So there was, of course, quite some embarrassment here, to say the least. They got it all wrong. And why would anyone, was a question I had, why would anyone be able to scientifically prove that there is no reality, whatever that means? What they did do is just the opposite. If you like, a bit exaggerated, they saved reality. And reality is global, not local. It takes in all relations. Relations that we would call historical and in the future, and you name it, it's all in there. And I think now that could soften up the understanding what is an attitude towards, or an attitude that the totality of everything means that all your thoughts, thinking, are opinions, what you did think before, and your ancestors and coming generations will think are over in this enormous global take, which can't even be called enormous because there is nothing to compare it with. Then attitude becomes the only possible for the soul. No longer does it make any sense to see attitude that. Not at all. An opinion that completely disappears from the choosable options. In a global reality, what would that even mean? Nothing. And I do like this closeness between Wittgenstein and the recent development in physics. and also brings the perspective of life world into play once more. That the importance of understanding that my way of being and a lot of traits I also share with my fellow compatriots creates a certain world at different levels, and that world is radically different from someone having a different life world. Illustrated from philosophical investigations by the famous "If a lion were to speak, we wouldn't understand what it was saying." Because its life world is different. The world will be literally different, whatever that means. But what we usually call physical world stops making sense. Did already in quantum mechanics, but it is deeply connected to this opinion that, confusing that with an attitude towards or an attitude that. So in a way, Wittgenstein, and this is not very true, but I'll say it anyway, he goes much further than, for instance, the Zapier-Whorf hypothesis. There are some important dissimilarities. Zapier-Whorf tried to prove different life worlds within our own language game. And that doesn't really make sense. Using words from English to show that Navajo is very different. We can't even understand what's different. That's important to directly express. If it were explainable, it would be the same life world altogether. And the second is, as we know, explanations do not show the grammar, how the expression is used. That can only be described. You can also compare that tendency for overusing or rather misusing explanations with the classical laws of physics. They are sort of explanations for things that has already taken place. Why? Well, it is because it's a forensical physics. It starts with what rather recently actually has happened. And then we assume the distant past and also the future to follow into that. And what does it follow? Our explanation that we choose, and a whole language game or a part of a language game will start to develop. And it will not explain the world. It will play by its own rules. So we learn that in a certain situation with a certain observation comes a certain explanation. So they get connected. And a better way of understanding this is to look it into the concerto example I mentioned the other day, where the conductor Bernstein was doing a repetition of one of the most famous pieces of Elgar, Nimrod. And he, together with the orchestra, develops, learns the piece, refine it. And his words, tonality, all of his body language, way of using his shirt, hands, fingers, very important, arms, accompanying the orchestra, so to speak. But to call that an explanation would be absolutely wrong. And there are two aspects that need to be carefully checked on. One is the idea that what Bernstein did could be collected and developed into the whole piece. And the second, that there is an explanation. It's not even causally connected to what's going on. It needs to be there, that's one thing. But it's only understandable for the orchestra and a few others. Cannot be generally possible to understand. There is no such thing as explanation per se, a way of putting things to an understandable mode. So anyone could understand concertos, physics, and so on. the classical laws, I would like to say, is a misuse of of explanation, like it covers everything, you can explain anything. Explanation has a very limited piece in the language game. And when used inaccurately, as in the case of the classical laws, or trying to explain what Wittgenstein says, Bernstein says, I got that wrong. Sorry. Doesn't make any sense. And as you can see, there are similarities. Be careful though, but the idea that the inner is a sort of origin, one could transfer that into say that the inner could be a potential explanation of what's happening on the outside. And in a very skewed form, memories can be explanations of what happened before. So it really caught on already in the mid-18th century with explanations, pre-made, prefabricated. An excellent example is, of course, Voltaire, who just adored Newton's Principia and made it to his Bible with all its explanations. Definitely one of those things that pushed everything even more in the direction of not seeing use in its natural habitat, or seeing the word explanation as it should be used, but only in a way when it's not working. And when the technological revolution comes about and we get, with industrialization, a lot of mass-produced machines, tools, equipment, all with their own telos of explanation, that would push it into the, would cover up understanding even worse. It is like putting dirt in an already clouded lake. And here the lake was already clouded. And these factors together become cogs in a machinery of misunderstanding that becomes stronger as time passes. We get this mechanized way, as I call it mechanized, this is not Wittgensteinian, mechanized way of making conclusions, and that there develops a pre-made model for how is a sane conclusion being made. So I could potentially just print out a piece of paper from some article and use those rules to tell whether it's fine or not using my own mind. That, of course, strengthens the tendency to obfuscation even further, even stronger into the not knowing of language misuse, and the frustration that inevitably erupts instead of pushing it into the right direction. I went the wrong way, I can feel it. No, that frustration will make your efforts to go into the Platonic cave even stronger. It will be the impetus. It is, in some ways, a genuine misconception. And without addressing that, no amount of effort will help it. You will think that looking outside of the universe is at least a possible way of getting information or knowledge, when it's in reality as a disaster for understanding. We get stranded because of these difficulties. They are definitely taxing on the everyday effort to live a life. It becomes effort, no longer easy, light, flowing. If you think it is possible to use the construction, my opinion is that that person has a soul. It will obstruct everything. If we make it tougher, we become gruesome. And as I often compared it, like using the wrong tool. You use, for instance, a wrench to hammer in a nail. And in this case, it halfway work. It doesn't work at all in a very nice way. But it will be effortful and painful. painful in the end. You will hit your thumb even more often than you would if you use the more appropriate hammer to hit the nail. But of course, needs to be done slowly. It's a lot of years of misuse in the history of man. And it also refreshes language. I noticed that my joyful language is coming back. All these, there's another thing, explanations are words, lexical explanations. Good to a certain extent, but they have, in these rituals of lexicalization, or these tendencies of explaining words, could take away the language skill. And it's misuse not only of explanation, but also of the word meaning and similar words. Like it would make sense to ask about every word in the English language what meaning it has. And then put it in a thesaurus so you can look it up and then you understand without using it, without growing up with it. That is most definitely something that is never possible. That's my cue, and I say to everyone listening in, watching in, thank you very much, and have a very pleasant day, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.